There is a particular kind of cold that settles into a house when its owner is dying, a chill that has nothing to do with the weather and everything to do with the anticipation of an end. I sat in my wheelchair in the corner of the grand library of Blackwood Estate, a blanket tucked around my wasted legs, listening to the silence. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was the held breath of a predator waiting for the wounded animal to finally stop twitching. I am Walter. I am 79 years old. My lungs are failing, scarred by idiopathic fibrosis that makes every breath feel like I am inhaling broken glass. This house, with its 12 bedrooms and imported marble floors, was once a home. It was where I raised my daughter, where I loved my wife until the cancer took her, where I built a fortune in shipping logistics. Now it is a mausoleum. It is a waiting room for the grave. The only warmth in the entire estate sat heavy and vibrating on my lap. Barnaby. He was an ugly cat by conventional standards, a tabby with a torn ear from a fight he likely lost, a scar running down his nose, and a tail that had been broken and healed crooked. I found him 5 years ago in a storm drain, half drowned and hissing at the world. We understood each other immediately. We were both survivors who had been chewed up by life and left for dead. Barnaby purred, his claws kneading the wool of my blanket. He was the only living creature in this house who didn't look at me and see a $sign. "You're a good boy," I wheezed, my hand trembling as I stroked his rough fur. The heavy oak doors of the library banged open. The vibration made Barnaby tense. My daughter, Jessica, walked in. She didn't knock. You don't knock when you enter a room occupied by a piece of furniture, and that is what I had become to her. Jessica was 45, wearing tennis whites that cost more than my first car. She looked like her mother, but where my wife had soft eyes and a gentle mouth, Jessica was all sharp angles and restless hunger. Her husband, Todd, trailed behind her. Todd was a man who had failed at 3 businesses I had funded and now made a full-time career out of waiting for me to die. He held a tablet, tapping at it with aggressive importance. "Dad, it's freezing in here," Jessica said, not asking how I was. She walked straight to the thermostat on the wall. "I'm turning it down. You keep it like a sauna. It's bad for the antiques." "I'm cold, Jessica," I whispered.
The effort to project my voice made my chest tighten. "Put on another sweater," Todd muttered without looking up. "Gas prices are up 30%. The estate assets, not your money, the assets. They were already managing my wealth as if it were theirs. Jessica dialed the temperature down to 60. I felt the draft almost immediately. It was a petty cruelty, a small reminder of who held the power. 6 months ago, they moved in to care for me. I asked. It was due at noon. Jessica sighed, a sound of exaggerated exhaustion. "Oh, God, I forgot. I was on the phone with the landscaper. You're so needy today, Dad. It's just a little discomfort." "I'll get it later," she waved a hand dismissively. "Todd and I have to go over the portfolio review. Just sit there and rest." They walked out. They didn't close the door. I sat there, the cold seeping into my bones. Barnaby looked up at me, his yellow eyes narrowed. He let out a low growl, staring at the empty doorway. He knew. Animals always know. "It's okay," I told him, though we both knew it wasn't. The inciting incident didn't happen with a shout or a bang. It happened with a whisper on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, 3 days later. I had managed to maneuver my wheelchair into the hallway shadows near the kitchen. I was thirsty. And since no one had checked on me in 4 hours, I was making the slow, painful pilgrimage to the sink. The rubber wheels of my chair were silent on the hardwood. I heard Jessica's voice from the kitchen. She wasn't speaking to Todd. She was on the phone, likely with one of her socialite friends. She wasn't whispering. She was laughing. "No, honestly, it's just a matter of days," she said. Her voice was light, bubbly. "The hospice nurse said his breathing is changing. The death rattle, they call it." I froze. My hand gripped the rim of the wheel. "Oh, the house? We're listing it immediately," she continued. "Todd already has a buyer lined up for the collection." My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "Yes, that nasty beast," she laughed. "No, I'm not looking for a shelter.
Who would want it? It's disgusting. The second the old man kicks the bucket, I'm taking that beast to the vet. Euthanasia. She paused, listening to the other person. We'll tell Dad he ran away if he lingers too long, she said, her voice dropping to a casual cruelty that turned my blood to ice. But if he dies Tuesday, the cat dies Wednesday. I'm already looking up the clinic hours.
I sat there in the shadows, invisible. I listened to my own flesh and blood plan the murder of my only friend, like she was scheduling a manicure. She thought I was deaf to her cruelty because I was frail. She thought I was a vegetable because I was dying. She didn't know that grief sharpens the senses. She didn't know that betrayal acts like adrenaline. If you've ever realized that the people waiting for your inheritance are the same ones praying for your death, hit that subscribe button. You need to see how a one-eared cat became the landlord of their nightmares. 1 step for Barnaby. 2 steps for the disrespect. 3 steps for the cruelty. It took me 20 minutes to descend 12 steps. By the time I reached the bottom, I was gray-faced and trembling, but I was standing. The taxi driver, a kind man with a thick beard, saw me and ran up the walk. "Just get the carrier," I wheezed, "and take me to Evans Veterinary Services." The clinic was a small converted house with peeling white paint and a sign that had seen better days. It wasn't the fancy pet hospital Jessica took her poodle to. This was where the working people went. This was where Dr. Sarah Evans worked. Sarah was 30, struggling with student debt, and possessed a heart of gold that hadn't yet been crushed by the world. She had saved Barnaby 5 years ago when other vets suggested putting him down because of his injuries. She had stitched him up, treated his infection, and charged me half of what she should have. I walked into the waiting room, leaning heavily on my cane, carrying Barnaby. The receptionist looked up, alarmed. "Mr. she asked, "Are you okay?" "Barnaby is fine," I rasped, collapsing into a plastic chair. "I need to see Dr. Evans, now." Sarah came out a moment later, wiping her hands on her scrubs. Her eyes went wide when she saw me. "Walter," she said, rushing over. "My God, you shouldn't be out." "I need a room," I said, gripping her arm. "Private, no cameras, no nurses." She saw the desperation in my eyes. She nodded. She helped me into the room. I placed Barnaby's carrier on the metal table. I sat on the stool, trying to catch my breath. "Walter," Sarah asked gently. "Barnaby is in danger," I said, "but not from a disease." I looked her in the eye. "I am changing my will, Sarah. Today, right now, I am establishing a pet trust." Sarah stared at me, her mouth open slightly. "Walter, that's millions of dollars," she asked. Sarah recoiled. "I heard her," I said, my voice trembling with the memory of the kitchen conversation. "She called him a beast. She said she wouldn't live with a litter box. She said if I die on Tuesday, the cat dies on Wednesday. She's going to euthanize him, Sarah, because he's an inconvenience." "That's horrible," Sarah whispered, looking at the carrier where Barnaby was sleeping. "I need a trustee," I said. "I need someone who controls the money and the house. Someone who values a life more than a bank account. I can't trust a lawyer. I can't trust a bank." I reached out and took her hand. My skin was papery and cold against hers. She pulled back slightly, fear crossing her face. "Walter, I can't. I'm just a vet. I don't know anything about managing an estate. Your family, they'll destroy me." "Let them try," I said. I pulled up the sleeve of my sweater. I showed her the bruises on my forearm, 4 distinct finger marks, purple and yellow, where Todd had grabbed me yesterday when I was too slow getting out of the bathroom. "This is what they do to their own father," I said softly. Sarah looked at the bruises. She looked at my wasted face. Then she looked at Barnaby. She reached into the carrier and stroked his torn ear. Barnaby leaned into her touch, purring loudly. Her face hardened. The fear didn't leave, but a resolve settled over it. "Do you need me?" she asked. "I brought a notary," I said. "He's waiting in the taxi. He's a retired judge. He hates bullies. We draft the document now." We spent the next 2 hours in that small exam room. The judge, Judge Miller, typed on his laptop while I dictated. The Barnaby Trust was created. It was a weapon made of paper. We stipulated everything. The trustee, Sarah, would have full, unchecked power of attorney over the residents to ensure the beneficiary's comfort.
The funds were to be used for the maintenance of the estate and the cat. And then the kill switch. Add the clause, I told Miller. The cat, she asked. No, I said. Make it specific. How much, she asked. $1, I said. We signed the papers. The stamp of the notary hit the page with a heavy, satisfying thud. It sounded like the closing of a prison cell door. It is done, Judge Mueller said, handing me the copies. This is ironclad, Walter. In the state of Georgia, a pet trust is valid and enforceable. What if the family dies? She asked quietly. Then the remainder goes to the ASPCA, I said. Every dime. Jessica and Todd get nothing. I returned to Blackwood Estate before the spa appointment ended, the taxi driver helping me up the steps. I collapsed into my armchair in the library, exhausted, my body screaming in pain, but my spirit soaring. Barnaby jumped onto my lap. Half an hour later, I heard the front door open. Jessica and Todd breezed in, smelling of eucalyptus and expensive oils. They looked relaxed. They looked like people who thought they had already won.
Ugh, traffic was a nightmare, Jessica complained, throwing her purse onto the antique sofa. She looked at me. Still sitting there, Dad? Just resting? I said. Well, don't get too comfortable, Todd said, pouring himself a drink from my crystal decanter. We have the appraiser coming tomorrow. He gestured to the room, to the books, to me. I smiled. It wasn't the weak, apologetic smile I usually gave them. It was a sharp, cold smile. That's fine, I said. Jessica asked, pausing. She looked suspicious. You look... I was just thinking, I said, stroking Barnaby's cricket tail, about the future. They looked at each other and rolled their eyes. Senility, they mouthed to each other. They didn't know. They didn't know that the man sitting in the chair was no longer a victim. They didn't know that
We're just planning for the future. On Saturday, Todd drove a realtor through the house while I was eating my lunch in the kitchen. He didn't introduce me. He walked right past me as if I were a piece of furniture that was inconveniently taking up floor space. The kitchen is dated, I heard Todd say, waving his hand around the room I had renovated for my wife. But it has good bones. We'll gut it. Open concept. Knock down that wall. The realtor whispered, glancing at me. Temporary, Todd said loud enough for me to hear. Transitional issue. I didn't say a word. I just fed a piece of high-grade turkey to Barnaby, who was sitting on the counter next to my plate, a transgression Jessica usually screamed about, but she was too busy counting her imaginary money to notice. Eat up, Barney, I whispered to the cat. You need your strength. The climax of their greed, and my revenge, was scheduled for Tuesday afternoon. I had convened a family meeting in the Grand Library. I told them I wanted to settle my affairs while I was still lucid. I told them I was tired of fighting. They were ecstatic. I could practically hear the champagne corks popping in their minds. The library was dim, lit only by the crackling fire in the massive stone hearth and the gray afternoon light filtering through the rain-streaked windows. I sat in my wingback chair, Barnaby curled on my lap, a warm, vibrating anchor in a sea of cold intentions. Jessica and Todd sat on the leather sofa opposite me. They were holding hands. It was a performance of unity for the benefit of the checkbook. They tried to look solemn, but the corners of their mouths kept twitching upward. They looked like children trying not to laugh in church. We appreciate you doing this, Dad, Jessica said, smoothing her skirt. It's the responsible thing to do. Protected, I repeated, the word tasting like ash. Yes. The heavy oak doors opened. Dr. Sarah Evans walked in. She was wearing a simple navy blazer and slacks, holding a briefcase. She looked terrified, but she walked with a purposeful stride. Behind her came Judge Miller, the notary, looking grim and official. Jessica's smile faltered. She dropped Todd's hand. She looked at Sarah with a mixture of confusion and sneering disdain. Why is the vet here? Jessica asked, her voice sharpening. Is the cat sick? Put it outside, Dad. Doctor. Evans is here because she is necessary, I said. My voice was amplified by the sudden, heavy silence of the room. It rasped, but it didn't shake. Sarah took the seat next to me. She placed her briefcase on the table. Barnaby lifted his head and chirped at her. She reached out and touched his torn ear, her hand steady. This is highly irregular, Todd huffed, crossing his arms. We expected Mr. Henderson is a golf partner, I said. Judge Miller is a witness. I motioned for Miller to open the folder. The sound of the paper sliding across the mahogany table was loud. Miller adjusted his glasses. He didn't look at Jessica or Todd. He looked at the document. This is the last will and testament and revocable living trust of Walter James Blackwood, Miller read. Jessica narrowed her eyes. I meet with a lot of people when you are at the spa, Jessica, I said softly. Miller cleared his throat. To my daughter, Jessica Marie Blackwood, and her husband, Todd Michael Stevens, Miller read, his voice flat and emotionless. Jessica leaned forward, her eyes hungry. Todd uncrossed his arms, leaning in. This was it, the moment they had waited 6 months for. I leave the sum of $1 each, Miller read. He paused. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a vacuum that sucked the air out of the room. Jessica blinked. She looked at Miller. She looked at me. Then she let out a short, sharp laugh. Okay, she said, shaking her head. Okay, Dad, very funny. You made your point. You're still mad about the thermostat. We get it. Now get to the real assets, the house. That was the bequest, Mrs. Stevens, Miller said, looking up over his spectacles. $1. That's impossible, Todd sputtered, his face turning a blotchy red. You can't disinherit your only child. That's illegal. I haven't disinherited her, I said calmly, scratching Barnaby under the chin. I left her $1. I nodded to Miller. Barnaby, whispered. For the sole benefit, care, maintenance, and comfort of my cat, Barnaby, Miller finished. The silence returned, but this time it wasn't a vacuum. It was heavy enough to crush bone. It pressed down on us, thick with shock and disbelief. The trustee, Miller concluded, gesturing to the young woman beside me, is Dr. Sarah Evans. Jessica screamed. It wasn't a word. It was a primal, ugly sound of pure entitlement being ripped away. She lunges across the table, her hands clawing at the air toward me. Bastard, she shrieked.
You gave it to the cat! It's an animal! It's a dirty, one-eared beast. I'll have you declared incompetent. I'll have you locked up.
Barnaby hissed, pressing himself against my chest. I held him tight. I am of sound mind, Jessica, I said, my voice cutting through her hysteria. I knew exactly what I was doing. Todd shouted, standing up and kicking the coffee table. No judge will uphold this. We'll sue you. We'll sue the vet. Sarah flinched, but she didn't retreat. Read the forfeiture clause, I said to Miller.
Jessica!
Yelled. Todd shouted, his face turning purple, veins bulging in his neck.
We live here!
Dr. Sarah Evans stood up. She was small, perhaps 5'4", wearing sensible shoes and a blazer from a discount store. But in that moment, fueled by the legal weight of $12 million and the moral weight of saving a life, she looked 10 feet tall. She reached into her briefcase. She pulled out a document. It wasn't on legal paper. It was on her clinic letterhead, but it was notarized. She placed it on the table in front of Todd. This is a notice to vacate, Sarah said. Her voice trembled slightly, but her eyes were flint. As trustee, I have a fiduciary duty to protect the beneficiary. You just threatened to kill him, Mr. Stevens. I heard you. You're a vet, Sarah sneered, spitting the words. I am the landlord, Sarah said, and I cannot allow individuals who have threatened the life of the resident to remain on the premises. You are a danger to Barnaby. Jessica whispered, the reality finally piercing her rage. She looked at the cat. Barnaby looked back. He didn't hiss. He just stared at her with his one good ear cocked, blinking slowly. He looked bored. The meltdown was spectacular. Jessica grabbed a Ming vase from the side table, a vase my wife had loved, and hurled it at the wall. It shattered into 1,000 blue and white shards. You big! She screamed at me. I hate you! You ruined it yourself, Jessica, I said quietly. All you had to do was wait. All you had to do was be kind, but you couldn't do it. Todd yelled at Sarah. Security, I said. The library doors opened again. 2 large men in uniform stepped in. They weren't the country club security. They were private contractors Sarah had hired with the retainer I gave her. Please escort Mr. and Mrs. Stevens to their rooms to pack, Sarah instructed them. Monitor them. Ah, Todd shouted as the guard took his arm. It's done, I said.
I watched them being led away. I watched Jessica weeping, not for the loss of her father, but for the loss of her lifestyle. I watched Todd cursing, blaming her, their marriage collapsing in real time under the weight of their failure. I turned my wheelchair toward the window. An hour later, I watched them throw their Louis Vuitton bags into the trunk of Todd's sports car. They were screaming at each other in the driveway. Jessica was shoving Todd. Todd was throwing his hands up.
They got in the car, they peeled out of the driveway, gravel spraying against the pristine lawn they would never inherit. They were gone. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of the last 6 months. It was the silence of a church after a storm. It was peaceful. Sarah walked over to me. She looked exhausted. She asked. "I am," I said. Sarah moved into the guest cottage that evening. She took over the management of the estate with a terrifying efficiency. She hired a proper nurse, a woman named Brenda who made excellent tea and liked cats, using the trust's funds. Barnaby roams the halls now. He sleeps on the silk rugs. He sharpens his claws on the antique tapestries, and no one yells at him. He is the king of his castle. I spend my days by the fire in the library. My breathing is getting worse. The rattle is there, just as Jessica predicted. I know I don't have much time left. Maybe a week. Maybe 2. But I am not afraid. I look down at my lap. Barnaby is asleep, his belly rising and falling in a steady rhythm. He is safe. He is protected. He is wealthy. I have ensured that the only creature who ever loved me unconditionally, the only soul who saw me when I was invisible, will live like a king long after I am gone. I close my eyes and listen to the fire crackle. It is a good sound. It sounds like victory.